Ys VIII was one of my favorite PlayStation Vita action RPGs. Though honestly, the Ys series in general is one of my favorite action RPG series. It's just a shame that the PlayStation Vita and PlayStation TV version of that game didn't get access to all of the content that was added for the PS4 release. Not that it matters too much now, because the game's released on the Switch with all of that exclusive content. So let's dive right in and see how the game goes on a new handheld. Here is my review of Ys VIII, Lacrimosa of Dana for the Nintendo Switch. Ys VIII takes place between the events of Ys V and Ys VII. On the way to the country of Altago, where Ys VII takes place, the ship Adol Kristen is riding on is attacked by a sea monster, leaving him and the rest of the crew stranded on a cursed island filled with monsters and ancient history. He then starts to gather up and lead the survivors, creating a small town and getting them to work together to find a way off the island. Now, story's never really been a big focal point of this series, but this game has a really great story. The first half of it's pretty slow about exploring the island and rescuing survivors, but once that second half takes over and you really start digging into the backstory of the secondary protagonist, Dana, it gets really in-depth, really good, and by the end of the game, I was in tears all over again. And one last thing about story is the translation. A lot of the early reviews for this game on the Switch noted that there were a lot of translation problems. Well, NIS America released a day one patch that updated the game with the new, redone translation. So as long as you spend a couple minutes downloading that patch, you're not going to run into any translation problems, voiced or text. Lacrimosa is an action RPG with party-based combat and a lot of exploration elements as you explore a huge overworld map. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say it's an open world game, but it's close. Now, the first thing we need to talk about is the fact that the Nintendo Switch version of Ys VIII has every single piece of new content that was added to the PlayStation 4 version of the game and was not added to the PlayStation Vita version. All of the dungeons, bosses, story scenes, gameplay transformations, and quests granted to Dana's side of the story are now available on the go. And as an added bonus, the Switch version also includes the silver armor costume for Adol, which was previously exclusive to PS4 pre-orders. Progression in Ys VIII basically has two halves to it. The first half of the game focuses a lot more on gameplay, especially exploration, and is pretty light on story. You've got this massive island overworld that you're exploring, fighting off enemies, while trying to find and rescue fellow castaways, bringing them back to the village, and also building up your numbers so you can clear up roadblocks to rescue more castaways. In a sense, the first half of Ys VIII plays like a lot of traditional Ys games do. Big focus on gameplay, light focus on story. And once the second half of the game kicks off, the focus quickly shifts to story, as you're constantly switching between exploring the island as Adol and exploring the island as Dana in her own era of time, learning the history about both her and the island. Granted, the PS4 gameplay additions do add a lot of gameplay elements to Dana's era, but there's still a huge story focus. Now, combat itself is very similar to the previous two games in the Ys series, Ys VII and Ys Memories of Celceta. You have a party of characters with you that you can swap between anytime you want, and each character has their own attack type, and a lot of enemies can only be decently damaged by using a specific attack type. This encourages you to swap between characters, exploiting weaknesses instead of just sticking with your favorite character from start to finish. This is also extended in the two alternate transformations that Dana gets in her era. Since you're only controlling her then, she's able to swap between the attack types by switching forms. And while I'm on the topic of combat, let's talk about the raid battle system, which is a system I wasn't overly in love with when I reviewed the Vita version of this game. Every once in a while during the story as you're exploring, you'll get a notification that the village is being attacked by monsters. You then have to teleport back to the village and take part in wave-based battles against enemies as they try to break into the village. Now, this is a pretty neat feature in the first half of the game, But the farther you get, the more often this happens and the farther you get in the story, and it tends to happen right at very, very crucial parts of the story. So much to the point where I started ignoring them altogether unless the story absolutely forced me back to the village to do them. It quickly became more of an annoyance than an interesting thing to do. Now, with all this extra content thrown in, how does that affect length? When I played through the PlayStation Vita version of this game, I completed it with the true ending in around 30 to 35 hours. Now, when I played it through on the Switch, I got to the true ending in about 35 hours again. But considering all of the extra dungeons that I went through, and the fact that I knew pretty well where everything was in the game, I'd gauge your first run through this version to be around 40 hours or so. Now let's get into presentation, which is a little strange. As far as the graphics go, when you've got the game docked, it definitely looks a little better than the PlayStation Vita version, as you can tell from this screenshot on the Vita to this screenshot on the Switch. Now when you got it in handheld mode, it looks very similar to the way the Vita version looked, but with a few extra problems thrown in. The first thing is that all of the grass and the ground textures when you're in handheld mode make this very strange, distorted flickering effect as you're running around. And the second is the fact that in some of Donna's extra dungeons, the game's resolution and image quality is very random. It'll go from being a little better than the Vita version to this. It's very strange. Tying this with the fact that in handheld mode, you get your occasional drops when you're in certain dungeons, you're pretty much getting the same kind of performance as you got on the Vita, at least in handheld mode. And now let's dive into battery life, which isn't as much as I would want, but it's not bad. Here are my battery times from 100% to 0%. Maximum brightness with the Wi-Fi on, 2 hours and 36 minutes. Maximum brightness with the Wi-Fi off, 3 hours. Lower brightness with the Wi-Fi on, 3 hours and 19 minutes. Lower brightness with the Wi-Fi off, 3 hours and 47 minutes. As I said, it's not as much as I wanted, but it's not bad. Now, in conclusion, Ys VIII Lacrimosa of Donna finally brings the complete and retranslated package to handheld fans, but not without the sacrifice of the strange flickering and the resolution drops. Still, if you're a handheld fan and you want this game, it plays about the same and has a lot more content than you'll get on the PlayStation Vita. Reviews to Go rates Ys VIII Lacrimosa of Donna for the Nintendo Switch an 8.5 out of 10. If you'd like to comment on this further, feel free to below or head to the website at www.reviewstogo.com.